Because I have a camp director voice, so pretty good at just projecting. My name's Macy. Welcome to our second session in our spring speaker series, Voices from and for the Land, with the Brunswick-Topsham Land Trust. So BTLT is celebrating their 40th year being an organization this year. Stewards, 40 years, I know. Longer than I've been on this earth, which is crazy. So Brunswick-Topsham Land Trust here in the area, we conserve land, we steward the land, we maintain trails, and we increase access to food systems. And we have the Crystal Springs Farmers Market, which was voted the best farmers market in Maine last year, third year in a row, so we're pretty proud of that. Hopefully you've had a chance to get there. We also have the Tom Settlemyre Garden, so community plots open to community members, and it's next to the labyrinth, so lots of really great things. In 2023, with the merger of CREA, the Cat-Hens River Education Alliance, BTLT took on more educational programs, particularly field trips that Sarah Rogers leads, does a really great job, and camp, which is the thing that I direct in the summer and is so fun. I'm kind of biased, but that is my favorite program through the Land Trust, and we're getting set to have another great season. So really, really excited, and really excited just to be here tonight and have a conversation with some incredible community members. So I won't say anything too much else. We do have some trail maps back there. If you want to get our newsletter, you can put your name on the list and you can be up to date with everything going on with the Land Trust. But without further ado, we've got voices of Changemakers, Ray and Sulwan.
I was like, people are starting to move their hands. Maybe I should give y'all a second to clap. My name is Ray Mills. I'm the climate adaptation resident as part of the Changemakers Residency program between Maine Environmental Education Association and the Nature Conservancy in Maine.
My name is Sulwan. I'm the community initiatives resident for the same thing.
So what is Changemakers? The Maine Environmental Changemakers Network is a youth-led intergenerational network that connects young Mainers ages 15 to 30, and we're pretty loose on that age range. We have a lot of people that are a little bit younger and a little bit older that are part of the network who are passionate about the environment with connecting them with peers and mentors in the environmental sector. This photo is from the 2024 Changemakers Gathering at Tanglewood, and a little plug for my sibling designed the t-shirt, by the way.
Their sibling looks exactly like them.
Yeah, I'll point those out. That is my sibling, and that is me. So it's the same face, just copy and paste on another person. Okay, over here. Sorry.
So I'm Sulwan. I'm super excited to be here with all of you tonight, connecting and creating friendships and bonds that will hopefully last a long time. I go by Sulwan. Ahmed is my great-great-great-grandfather's last name. So where I'm from, we actually do our father's last name as like our last names, but because I'm in the States right now, and I grew up here, I've just been using my great-great-great-great-grandfather's last name as everyone does. But my dad's name is Mansour, so I take pride in that. Sulwan Mansour is also what I go by, or just Sulwan. I love my name. It means solace in Arabic. I'm a first-generation Sudanese-American refugee. I was born in Sudan. So much love for Sudan right now, especially with what's happening there. I briefly grew up in Egypt before coming to Portland when I was 3 years old. I come from a family of farmers, intellectuals, teachers, and community nourishers. That's what I'm doing here now in Maine. I graduated from Bowdoin College as a Mellon Mays Research Fellow in 2022, so I was in college during the pandemic. It was amazing. But Brunswick and Portland have been home for me for the past 6 years, and I moved between the two. And my career goals are a career in medicine and epidemiology with a concentration in urban development.
My name is Ray Mills. I am of Wabanaki and Franco-American descent. My family comes from the Penobscot Nation, so Bonawapskui, is what we call ourselves, from the Penobscot River, and Wollanuck First Nation, which is in Quebec. It's an Abenaki community. But I grew up in Bryant Pond, Maine, so if you don't know, it's in Oxford County. It's kind of between Bethel and Norway. So if you ever go skiing at Sunday River and there's a 90-degree turn, I live right up the road from that turn. And my grandfather used to live in the apartment building that people run into a lot. It's right on the corner. I spent my childhood along the Androscoggin River, so Lucy-Guntukuk, means the river of rock shelters along the bottom. I grew up in a family that was very connected to the land, and while we weren't, a lot of us didn't really grow up in our home communities, and either reserve that we're from, we kind of made a home for ourselves in Western Maine. For the majority of my life, we grew, hunted, or foraged a lot of our food, and a lot of these, so I included some pictures from when I was growing up. And yes, I'm sledding in a canoe on the bottom. I did a program called Pathfinders, which is like a scouting program through my grandmother's church. And I learned a ton from that, and got to share a lot of my knowledge. I learned orienteering and survival skills, and then the top right picture is a photo of myself and my friend Conrad teaching an ice fishing honor to a bunch of like younger kids in our group. And then the picture on the left is from something called Outdoor School. So I've been involved in some form with outdoor education for my entire life, whether it was through school or my grandmother's church or through just my family. I graduated from the University of Maine with a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and Native American Studies, and a lot of my education was focused around like climate sciences, and I did a lot of archaeology previously. So in a past life, I was an archaeologist.
So Ray and I are going to talk to you guys about our work a little bit, and you'll have the opportunity to ask us questions about our work towards the end. It's not really the end, it's like the middle, but so in my role, I expand nature-based programming for young Muslim sisters of Greater Portland and the Tree Street youth specifically. I coordinate swim lessons for BIPOC women in southern Maine, mostly mothers and folks over the age of 24. I'm a board member of the Nature-Based Education Consortium Outdoor Equity Working Group, which I'm grateful to be a part of. I have so many great colleagues on that committee. In my research project, I'm exploring the relationship between nature, well-being, and belonging among youth in urban areas in Maine. And I represent MIA and TNC at community events, as I'm doing today.
And my work as climate adaptation resident. So a lot of my work focuses around implementing nature-based solutions to climatic events in various communities in Maine, whether that is working on like inland flooding or in other cases working around food access and things like that. Some examples of recent work is I wrote map narratives for the Latin American region office for a project analyzing potential impacts of climate changes on communities throughout the Amazon basin. So working on GIS mapping throughout Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, French Guiana, Bolivia, kind of encompassing the whole Amazonian river basin. Right now I'm working on creating an outreach and engagement playbook for the whole band of Maliseet Indians. We're working on in-stream restoration, and I'm going to be building out like an informational website basically. I have been working on establishing and helping to maintain relationships with Wabanaki communities throughout Maine by visiting communities and collaborating on a variety of projects, kind of taking a position where I'm a foot in both worlds, working both in conservation and then also being involved in my community. I'm leading the data analysis portion of the LISTEN project, which is a youth-led participatory research project about the youth climate movement in Maine. And then I also provide some on-the-ground support for MIA events, so our Changemakers gathering and annual conference, and speaking at some events. Actually, I really like public speaking, which most people don't say. But in October, I had the opportunity to speak at a TNC event. I gave the welcome for the Women in Climate Forests event, which I really enjoyed, and started to realize I actually really love public speaking, which I'm glad I can't go back in time and tell like 11-year-old me that, because she would not be a fan. And after giving all that information, I'm realizing a lot of my work has been very data heavy, like data and hard science heavy. Which I also don't think a lot of people get excited about data analysis like I do.
I don't like public speaking, but if I'm going to do something, I have to be one of the best at it. So I will keep doing it until I'm really, really good.
So we've included a couple questions to help prompt reflection and conversation, whether amongst yourselves or also with us. Some of the questions are, what was your relationship with land and place like in the past? So for me, being Indigenous and growing up in my traditional homeland and growing up along the river I really love, that's kind of what drove me to like what I do now. I grew up along the Androscoggin River, which at one time was one of the most polluted rivers in the country. And my family were some of like the drivers of cleaning up the Androscoggin. My grandfather was a huge advocate on kind of cleaning out a lot of like the mill debris that was traveling down the river and impacting my family's drinking water and fisheries and like the food that we relied on. A lot of the pollutants affected where we would go to harvest fiddleheads, and for a long time the fiddleheads weren't growing anymore, and they started growing again about 10 years ago, so we can return to that area. And that's kind of one way that my past influences my current relationship to the land. And Sulwan, if you want to share, no pressure.
Yeah, there's an amalgamation of so many things that influence my relationship to the land. For one, I'm a displaced person, so I've always been searching for a home, leaving Sudan as a refugee, and then being in Egypt, I always knew that I would have to find home somewhere, right? And so when we made our way to Maine, that is where we made our first home, and my parents love Maine. They love Maine so much, I don't know what it is, but they love it. So we made it home. And then as I grew up, I just saw so many things happening in my life that connected back to my environment, right? When we moved here, the house we lived on Park Ave in Portland had lead poisoning, and so my brother got lead poisoning in that house. And so that kind of influenced my upbringing, especially my relationship with my siblings, constantly being worried about like what they're doing, what they're touching. And this is something that's not just like prevalent for me and my community, but it's like prevalent across Maine communities, right? Our homes are very old, often run down and not taken care of the way that they should. And Maine is a place where community is great, but also we lack so many resources, right? And so that influenced my relationship to land heavily. And then when I grew up, went to high school, my dad constantly talked to me about like what was happening back in Sudan, and then also like how a lot of liberation movements in Africa have been influenced by liberation movements that happened in the United States, starting from when unionization was happening at the workplace here in the United States, civil rights movement. Someone who often came to Sudan and talked to Sudanese people was Malcolm X, and my dad loved Malcolm X so much. And so my relationship to land has always been a transnational relationship. That's what I say. And the earth, I'm always finding home. And I'm always seeing how just like my movement through the earth is impacted by just my upbringing in different environments, and how this is a shared experience. It's different, but also a shared experience between so many other Mainers, despite all the conflict that exists between us. Here and then, I constantly will remind myself we're always closer to poverty and lack of resources than we are to the people in power. And so that influences my relationship to land. I know it's an answer that's everywhere and it's something I'm always trying to formulate, but I think it's also beautiful that I can't find words to formulate or a sentence to formulate, because every single interaction I have influences my relationship to land from the past and present and probably future. So
yeah, we wanted to spend, I know that we didn't spend like a lot of time talking, like going super in depth. I didn't want anyone falling asleep. Yeah. So we wanted to leave a lot of like space and openness for questions, like either questions about our work, or if you just would like to talk to your neighbor, or just kind of express like what is your relationship with the land been like in the past, and like say like one example I can think of for myself and for my mom. We've both always been like really avid bird watchers, and it's because my great grandmother, for my whole life, and as far as I know for my mom's whole life, one of my great grandmother's favorite things to do was to sit by this really big bay window she had and just watch the birds. And she like kept track in a little notebook of what types of birds she saw, and then she would go to the library and have them scan that, because she refused to set up an email or use an online form or anything. She would have the librarian scan it and send it to the Maine Audubon. So they have a ongoing like 50-year record of my great grandmother's bird watching that is in scanned notebook format. But that's something that, like, there's so many things when you think about it that your current relationship with land is impacted by your past and vice versa. And we want to leave a lot of space to kind of get that conversation going and to start thinking about that. So if anyone would like to share. Yes.
I'll share something. I have something in common with your great-grandmother,
Yeah.
although I only have 25 years of bird observations. And in terms of land, my great-grandmother built a house down east on the coast, and that's where I came every summer for at least a couple of weeks. And it was that experience and being out and able to wander wherever I wanted to and go into the intertidal zone that made me decide to major in biology, get my degree, my graduate degree, and then go into teaching to share what I had learned and loved about the way nature put itself together and why it did. So I'm still doing that. So I guess that thread hasn't been yanked yet. It's still
I don't think it ever will.
that's a great way to put it. I think just the fact that you were able to see that everything was so aligned and perfect. There's this saying in my faith, like with every hardship comes ease. And it's not necessarily with every hardship after is ease, is with it is ease, right? And there's aspects in our day-to-day life that are easy, right? And it's there so naturally and so beautifully. And that's kind of how the earth is made, right? Like the way gravity is holding us down and we're floating in this rock in the middle of space. The oxygen we breathe, right? It's just like perfectly crafted. And your story kind of shows that also, right? That perfection in nature.
Yeah, I have a very similar but different perspective on it. I was raised to look at how everything around me kind of communicates on its own, and sends signals to each other. Like the example that I can think of is the shadberry or serviceberry, or there's another word for it. Maybe Juneberry? I don't think it's Juneberry? Okay. Yeah, I'm like, I know it as shadberry. That when the shadberry starts coming out, that's when the shad are running, and that's where it gets its name. And vice versa, if you see the shadow running, you know that that berry's ready. Like recently when I was home, I was taking my grandmother, I was taking my Nana to the post office, because that's like her big outing of the day. And we were driving, we both grew up right next to, we call it Lake Christopher. On the map it's called Bryant Pond. But if you come to Bryant Pond and you call the lake Bryant Pond, we'll know you're from Hawaii. So FYI, fair warning. We were driving by and my Nana looked out the window and she was like, oh, okay, the ice is melting. And she's like, oh, we're getting close to the month of crusted snow. And I was like, okay, yeah, I kind of remember that. And I was like, well, Nana, what does that mean? And she was like, oh, well, the smelt are going to start running, so we're going to be able to go smelting, and then about a week after the smelt are running, the fiddleheads are going to pop up, and then we're going to start seeing the chanterelles and the black trumpets and things like that. So everything is kind of connected in that type of thread that you were talking about. And my grandfather always compares everything to the aspen tree, where aspen trees have this intricate network underneath the ground that communicates to one another. And that's kind of how, at least in my eyes, everything is everything has something under the ground that we're all touching, and we all have that thing in connection, which I think is kind of what I was trying to get at with these words. But if anyone else would like to share, or if you have any questions about the work that we do.
Do you find it to be a real challenge for modern children who are explorers of the coast, have iPhones and internet and so forth to command their attention, to get them into the outdoors? Because I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and the city park was right across the street, and I spent, my upbringing collecting buckeyes and frogs and fishing in the local pond, and grew to love nature, and through the Boy Scouts as well. So that stuck with me my whole life. But then I see my grandchildren, which are some of which are spending all their time playing video games, and it's hard to get them outdoors unless they aren't living. Well, they're living fairly close to the outdoors, which is good. But nonetheless, how big a challenge is it dealing with modern children that have all these other demands on their time and attention?
So I have 6 younger siblings, right? And the youngest is 3, so there's a 23-year difference between me and the youngest of my siblings. And I've found that with my siblings, that hasn't been particularly difficult, but I think the reason for that is that we don't get cell service anyway. So I think that's probably the major driver for my family is we can't use our phones where I grew up, where my parents' house is. We still have to climb the hill to make a phone call. And we didn't have internet until I think I was going into my senior year of high school. Because I grew up, we were about a quarter of a mile off of a mostly paved road that's off of Route 219. So still like a few roads off of an actual main road. And before there was the option to get like satellite for internet, we would have had to get like a telephone wire going out. And it would have been like almost $10,000 to get when it reached our house. So my parents were like, no, we have a library in town, that's enough. So I think that's been like a benefit for like me and my siblings growing up, that it just like kind of wasn't an option. I also grew up on a farm, so there was way more entertainment with like piglets and calves and like little baby animals. But I do have a younger cousin who's 5, who is very much wants his tablet right in front of him. And I found that with like my younger family members that don't like that, it's kind of either a baby animal, something messy, or a bug that will get them outside. So it's like, I really like taking like my younger cousins to like the Granimal farm, or like in the springtime, we'll go out and like we keep like a little blind out in the woods, and we'll go and sit there and wait for like the fawns to walk by. But my little cousin Jackson, he also is very like, he's very intuitive. So I think like with young kids, asking them questions that prompt like their thinking. The best example I can think of is he was hanging out with me for like a long weekend because his mom was working. And we went out to play in the mud and to draw on the sidewalk, and in his words, nudge bugs. That's what he says. He's like, let's go nudge bugs, because it's just you poke him and you make him walk, and entertains him. I don't know. And we found like this big stump across the street, and it was like surrounded by like mushrooms. And it was some of the puffball mushrooms that had gone by. And so I showed him that if you step on it, it like poofs up with like smoke. And he was like, oh, this is cool. Is it on fire? And I was like, no. And so I started to explain spores. And then the next day we went to a park. And we were playing with, you know, little touch-me-nots. And I was showing him how if you pinch the bottom of the touch-me-not pod, the seed pod bursts. And he was like, oh, is that like with the spores? And I was like, yeah. And he was barely 4 at the time. He had just turned 4 like a month before. And he made that connection because we were playing with something that, like, at first we're playing with these mushrooms that puff in a thing of smoke and it gets all over the place and it's nasty. And his mom was like, no, you need to vacuum yourself off before you go inside. And then we were playing with these touch-me-nots that kind of pop. So I think, especially with really little kids like gross things and they like surprising things. And for me, that's what I've found has been like the easiest to get like my younger siblings and my cousins kind of more involved, or finding something that they really enjoy. Like my brother Efren, he went through a phase of tying flies because he really enjoys fishing. So I kind of think that helping kids make that connection based on something that just gives them joy anyways is really helpful. Another thing that I've done is trying to, like when I was a kid, I used to make potions. Me and my cousins would mix mud and sticks and leaves and stuff. And then that got me into, do you do that? Yeah, I think that's like, I love doing that. I love that I have younger siblings and little cousins because I still get to make potions. But another thing I started doing with my cousins, I still do it, is to make like natural dyes from flowers and like onion skins and things like that. So I think letting kids be gross and messy is a really good way to get them to interact with nature.
I also think, to add on to that, I agree. Having things to do is what gets kids away from the screen. So I'm a city girl. We have access to good service 90% of the time, still in Maine. But growing up, so Wi-Fi wasn't the best. Like we still didn't have like access to like good Wi-Fi when I was younger. So we spent like half of the day out. Like when we came back from school, we would be outside, just playing in our parking lot. Right? We had like sand and we'd make potions, we'd play house, all that good stuff. I think technology is an aspect of the problem. I know it's really accessible now in Wi-Fi, but also it's a form of escapism for young parents, I think specifically, who have spent so much of their lives working. And it's a great solution, right, when you cannot like parent or be there for your child all the time. I'm trying to think about like what I'm seeing in the city. It's easy to just give your child, the tablet and deal with all the other things you have to deal with, whether it be like the bills, getting food, getting groceries and stuff, because parents don't necessarily have the resources to be a parent, right? Many of the folks who are, I think it's like Gen Y, millennials, and before then, my mom's generation, they've been through a few recessions, right? So my parents were always working growing up. And so they relied heavily on the community to take care of us. And now we don't necessarily have that communal sense just because things aren't the best right now. They haven't been the best for a while. So to answer your question, I don't think it's hard getting young people away from the tablets, especially if you give them something to do. Like for me, I will literally take my car and be with the neighborhood kids and be like, let's go get ice cream together. And once we go get ice cream together, we'll get to go to the park, they'll play, they'll see the mushrooms on the ground, they'll see like the little interactions they have with nature means so much to them. And on top of that, they get to connect. So just having a figure like in the community they can go to and who's reliable and trustworthy, especially for the parents. I really am big on creating good relationships with my neighbors and my parents so they know they can always come to me if they need it. Many of my neighbors are young parents too, and they spend the day working, so it's hard to just like be with the kids all the time. And so I think technology has just been a solution for how hard it can be to parent in this day and age. Yeah.
It's an option that's like, I mean, it's available, and it's with like the ability to add parental locks and things, like it's relatively safe, especially if you live like in a town and you don't have time to go outside with your kids. But I think it's also like, I definitely think it's part of that community thing. So like for me, growing up, I didn't really have like babysitters or go to daycare or anything like that, mostly because I had like older relatives, like my great aunt. During February break, for example, a bunch of my siblings and cousins and neighborhood kids, we would all go to my great aunt's house, and she had this big farmhouse with a bunch of like forest behind it and these big fields, and we would basically just run wild. And then we would come in for lunchtime, check for ticks, get food, and that was kind of like what we did growing up. But I think it's harder, like if I were to grow up in, say, Portland. I've been noticing this living in Portland, that for me it doesn't fit for me. Like I like complete darkness and silence. I don't like street lights. I didn't realize that until I moved to Portland. But I'm definitely I like Portland for other people, I think is what it is. It's not that I don't like Portland. I love Portland.
Nice to me.
I don't like Portland for me, because I need to be in the woods and in quiet and dark and things like that. But I think some things that my grandmother's been doing, because my grandmother and my grandfather they've been having a hard time getting around as they've gotten older, and especially my grandfather, as he has a prosthetic leg, so getting around is kind of difficult. What he's been doing with like my little cousins is making like fairy houses. So he's been making those in the garden, but he's like, I don't believe in fairies. He's like, they're toad homes. So that's what he's been saying. He's been making houses for the toads in his garden, which is like a super like easy and accessible thing, even to do. Like, I have some neighborhood kids in my area that I was hanging out outside, and the kids were like, hey, will you help me make something? And his mom was right there. She's like, yeah, sure. And so we made a little toad home in the little kind of, it's between the sidewalk and the road. I don't know what to call that little grassy area. But now there's a little home for the neighborhood toad.
Or the fairy.
Yeah, or the fairy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's other things that my grandmother's been doing, like leaf rubbings. My cousins have been really enjoying those, because then they can cut them out and bring them home. And that's a good way to, like, say you're out on a walk picking up a leaf that's on the ground. It's very, like, leave no trace friendly. You can take the leaf and throw it in your compost or put it outside, and then you have, like, a little decoration. So I think having the time and the access, there are like a lot of options that I think are really fun.
Yeah. I definitely feel that. Like with my younger brother, during the pandemic, I would say technology usage got really excessive. So what I did was just took him out. I gave him my old lacrosse stick. I used to play lacrosse in high school. And I said, let's go play lacrosse in the backyard. And so we played lacrosse one time, and every single day after that, I mean, young people are very smart, right? When they know they have options, they're gonna choose the option where they can like get out there, use their hands. So my brother would be like, can we go play lacrosse? Can we go play lacrosse? And so just like showing young people they have options, not even like, is a great way forward to just alleviating excessive technology usage.
I don't know whether you're involved in all the schools, but it seems like schools have been trying a lot more to get kids outside, and lots of organizations. And I know BTLT works with the schools a lot. We have kids coming to CREA. There's independent study at the high school level, but it's all over the state. I know the Appalachian Mountain Club has kids come out to their properties, they do programs with them, where they go into the schools, Katahdin Woods and Waters, doing the same thing. I'm sure Acadia National Park does the same thing. How much of that do you folks see, and how, you must think that's pretty beneficial, I would think. I mean, some schools, even teachers will go out and teach a class outdoors, and we saw a lot more of that, it seemed, after COVID. And are you hearing much about that or seeing much of that? No?
Yeah, so at MIA, what is Anna's title?
She's the Director of School and Community Partnerships.
Yeah, Director of School and Community Partnerships. So we have a staff member at MIA that works very closely with schools. I would say I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this. So the Listen Project that I had mentioned earlier, one of the things that we're learning from the youth that have responded to that survey, we had 123 young people, 30 and under, who responded, and a lot of them are looking for more outdoor education and more environmental education in the school system. And a lot of I think a lot of schools are trying to meet that need that is coming up, and that is being voiced by more young people. But it's definitely something that, as kind of part of the whole mission of MIA, or one of the things that we do, is trying to bring more environmental education into schools. Another thing that we do is we have a mini grant program that we do every year, where teachers can apply for a mini grant of up to $1,500 to do some sort of outdoor educational program, and that can look like I read, I think, 23 of them or something this past year. We had a lot of applications. A lot of them that I was seeing was teachers that wanted to get weather appropriate outdoor gear, so rain boots and raincoats and things like that for their students to be able to use when going outside. Other examples where there were some teachers that were trying to start community gardens or purchase snowshoes for their classroom and things like that. So teachers are definitely trying to meet that need, and students are wanting that. And I think a lot of it comes down to accessibility and resources, and especially finances. A lot of students might not have access to weather appropriate rain gear or snow gear, and it's if you don't have the clothing that you need to go outside and to be safe doing so, of course you're going to stay inside and watch TV.
Yeah, and also young people are taking initiatives to create outdoor learning environments for themselves. At MIA, last year the climate education bill was passed, right, and that was youth-led. And coming up we have the Green Schools bill that is also youth-led. So it's not only the teachers who, like Ray said, it's not only the teachers who are taking the steps forward to make nature-based education accessible, but students want that too. Young people want that also. speaking from my own experience as an educator, my students would actually like plan out excursions for themselves. I would tell them, like, be very transparent, this is how much money we have, these are the places we can go, y'all pick what you want to do, and then they will figure out, like, they will create an itinerary for themselves. For instance, last year we went to do Monkey See, Monkey Do, the ropes climbing course, because they wanted to do that really badly. And that was something they created on their own, right? Something they planned out. And I do notice that when students have the option to plan things out, they will, and they'll make it so it's accessible to all the young people in their classroom. So it's amazing seeing those things. And I definitely think that, at least when I speak to my other colleagues across the country, there is a higher emphasis on nature-based education in the schools, because there is that connection to place, and Maine is very nature-oriented place, right? And so that connection to place is integral to them developing a sense of identity in the state of Maine.
And I think, so this is just a personal like hypothesis. This is not like, I haven't looked into this further, but I personally think that outdoor education kind of became more talked about like after the COVID lockdown and everything. Because honestly, I think a lot of people just got sick of being on Zoom. Like, I really think that that's a big chunk of it. I know I got sick of being on Zoom, and like me and my sibling Nico were living together at the time with my great aunt. And we would get off of our Zoom classes and we would be like, do you just want to go walk around in the woods? And we would just go walk around in the woods as like 20-something-year-olds and take big sticks and hit them against the trees and like look for cool rocks and look for like animal bones and different plants. And we got back and like we did a lot of like mushroom foraging and like picking elderberries and things like that. So my personal hypothesis as to why that became kind of bigger and more talked about after the COVID lockdown was because everyone was just sick of looking at screens, because we had to do it and we didn't have like, it wasn't like this is another option, like this is something I can do at the end of the day instead of being in class. It was like that was your only option. It was the only thing that you could do. So that's my hypothesis as to why it's, I mean, I went to a school that was very big on outdoor education and on experiential education. But I definitely have seen that shift in just what people are talking about. Like more people are talking about putting like outdoor education programs into schools. And I think that happening after COVID is because we were like, man, I've been staring at Zoom all day long and I need to just go and throw rocks around in the woods. That's honestly what I feel about it.
Yeah, and I did notice, I was tracking my students' test scores for like the 2 years I was an educator. The more often they had access to outdoors and nature-based education, the better they typically did on test scores. I don't know the correlation, but maybe it's because they were away from technology, and the pandemic was a hard hit on young people. I don't know if you all have ever looked at like the standardized, I'm not like saying standardized tests are the best way to measure education, but it's not the best, but they are like data we can utilize. And the scores were really low post-pandemic. And so with nature-based education, we see there's a correlation in improved test scores for young people.
Yes.
So I'm only a first-generation Mainer, but even, and I also play video games and live outside. But even in my like brief 30 some odd years here connected to this place, the amount of change that I've seen has been drastic. Like stripers that used to be super easy to catch, it's now really uncommon to catch more than a few a season. Cardinals I used to see like maybe once a year, now I see them year round. Like I'm curious to hear more about your experience about what that means for outdoor education and for you as someone who has like a deep generational history and connection to this place.
Yeah. I mean, this year, the kind of big talk of the town, literally, every single like convenience store, there's always going to be like a couple guys sitting in the back drinking coffee and talking about whatever's the hot topic. And it's all, like this year, it's been the ice. That this is the first year that we've seen good ice on the lakes. And everybody was out. Like, there were shacks every 5 or 6 feet. There was a fishing derby every single weekend. And that's what I'm used to when I was young, is I'm used to, after the 1st of January, like my stepdad would go out with a big pole, or I was with my grandfather or my dad, or someone in my family would go out with like a metal rod and poke the ice and make sure it was thick enough, and then we'd be like, all right, fishing time's on. And then every Saturday and Sunday, my whole family would be out on the ice, and the reason we all had to go was because it's 5 holes drilled per person. So the more people equals the more fish. That was the logic. My mom's a vegetarian, but she got her fishing license every year because we needed more people. And that was one of the things that we would use to feed ourselves for the entire winter. Is we would go out and we would get our limit every single weekend, and we would take that home, eat some of it, freeze the rest. And a lot of times, like, what we got over the winter time was what would kind of provide like a cushion for us for the couple of months after the water goes out and before a lot of like the mushrooms and fiddleheads and elderberries are kind of springing up. So just even like in my 26 years, I've noticed a dramatic difference from when I was young to now, of not having access to our like places that we always fished and where my family has fished for generations. Fewer people in my family get a deer in the fall. Me and my sibling actually came across a hit deer a while ago, and it was like all anyone could talk about. My Nana was so excited. She's like, I can finally get backstrapped. No one's gotten a deer in 2 years, but now there's a hit deer. And so like there's been this massive change, and for my family in particular, it's been around like traditions within hunting and fishing and just feeding ourselves has been kind of the big concern. But that also ties in, like, if we don't have access to the food that we normally would eat, that we can just go out in the woods and find, we then have to spend more money and go to town. And if we go to Walmart, it's 40 minutes away. So you have to spend money to drive there and get back, and it's just kind of the snowball is what's affected my family. That's part of the reason my grandmother on my mom's side actually started running a food pantry. Mm-hmm. And she kind of built a food pantry up basically from the ground, from like a closet in the basement to one that feeds 400 families. Mm-hmm. And that was like the reason that she did it. It was mainly because people didn't have access to the food that they needed. And I admittedly haven't really been in the environmental education space for that long. And my position, I honestly I don't work as closely with students. But I think like the fear of what I am, like say I'm a high schooler, and the fear of what if when I have kids they don't have access to the things that I got the chance to do. That's like my big fear, is like I learned all of this knowledge that's been passed down for thousands of years in my family, and like what if there's no one to give it to, or there's like if I give it to them and it's gone, like what do I do with that? That's been like my big fear for a long time, is like what's going to happen to it. I don't know if I really answered your question fully.
No, that was great.
Any other questions?
I will say the change I've seen is people aren't plowing the snow. Like the city has lost the capacity to plow snow because we haven't had it in forever. But I will say, yeah, this winter is the first winter where like we were out sledding every day. We went skiing. Like the community actively tried to put those efforts in, but the small amount of snow. Well, we had a lot of snow for like 2 weeks for those 2 weeks, right? right? There were excursions every single day because they wanted young people to have the opportunity to be out in the snow. Because I know my siblings, when I tell them growing up we'd see 5 feet of snow like on our doorstep, they're just so taken aback because they've never seen that.
Yeah, I remember, like, even when I was little, I mean, I grew up in Bryant Pond, and we regularly get over a foot dropped on us, like, every storm. Last few years, not so much. But I remember stories from, like, my grandfather where he would say that they'd have to, like, dig a path from their dooryard, and it would be, like, above their heads. So when he said he had to walk to school through the snow both ways, he wasn't lying. Like, that wasn't an exaggeration at all. Like, when he said that, he was being very honest about it. But, yeah, there was something else I was going to say, but I totally forgot it.
I'm curious, I heard something about, I know there was the Borealis series that was on Maine Public, and I understood that the Nature Conservancy was working with Aislinn, I can't pronounce her last name, Sarnaki, and they were going to be doing some kind of presentation. Do you know anything about what they're working on? Or are you allowed to say?
I mean, my coworker is. Teresa might know. Do you know?
I gotta say, I have no idea. I'm really sorry.
I know Borealis is going to do another series, and it was very interesting watching the first one. If you haven't watched it, watch it, because it's all these different organizations in the state that most of us wouldn't have a clue are out there. You know, whether it's working with new immigrants to get them outdoors, or working with, you know, people with, I hate to use the word handicap, but differently abled, and getting them out on a surfboard or paddleboard or something like that. All these different things that we'd never hear about otherwise, and wouldn't have a clue that there's all these things going on to get people outdoors. So they can have that experience.
I think, yeah, it sucks that we don't really know what's happening, like, within community, but there's, like, efforts to also protect the communities that these organizations work with, and which is often why we don't hear about these kinds of initiatives happening for marginalized populations in our state. I mean, everyone knows of, like, the Nature Conservancy by name. Not everyone. I didn't know about it until I worked there, but it's everybody but you. I just got lucky. But yeah, there's also a communal responsibility to protect the people we work with.
I guess going along with that, I feel like there's been a pretty big change. Like, if we've been having this conversation 20 years ago, your voices might have felt like very isolated, or I'm just wondering how, like, when you bring your particular backgrounds to these conversations in Maine, do you feel, I don't know, what's that like? Do you feel, supported? Do you feel like you're sharing a very minority viewpoint? I'm just curious to hear what your experience is like there.
I'll say for me, I feel very privileged that I do have this voice and that people will actually listen to me, because it hasn't been that long in my family that, like, we've had that opportunity, that I don't think, like, my dad was the first born in my family that was born with the right to practice our beliefs, that we had those protections in place. My great-grandmother, she wasn't able to vote until she was in her 30s. So I feel very privileged that, like, I have the opportunity to kind of, like, to be able to do this sort of thing and to have access to the education that I had access to and to have the career opportunities that I have. But I do also feel kind of lonely a lot of times. but it's no fault. It's no one's fault. It's just like the reality of being like in a lot of like work environments I've been in, the only Indigenous person, and I will say I have a habit of like when around other Wabanaki people, like we're immediately like best friends, and we're like, all right, we're latching onto each other, which I think is just like a natural inclination for humans. But there's been a lot of progress, like even in my lifetime. Like one example I can think of is one of the things that we do at MIA is a Wabanaki education workshop series for educators. Like my younger brothers have learned about Wabanaki people, and I've learned about, and my younger brothers on my mom's side who are not Native, they learned about it in school. I actually, when I was in high school, my senior project was doing a Wabanaki education series in my district because I was told I was in an American history class junior year, and I remember this very distinctly. It was the 1 week at the beginning of the year, the beginning of American history, where the teacher would talk about there were Native Americans and now there aren't. And somebody asked, like, oh, are there tribes in Maine? He said, no. And I was like, am I see-through? Like, what's going on? And even just between, like, I graduated high school in 2016. Between, like, it's been not even 10 years. There's been a massive difference. And just in my lifetime, like, Wabanaki voices we've had the opportunity to be uplifted, but it's still difficult, and especially when talking about land and the relationship with land, that I think there's just a built-in cultural difference in the way that land is seen. That instead of like, I've never understood the whole own the land, farm the land, that it's like, no, it's to me it's always been a relationship. It's always been like the land is a relative. Like there's a reason that when we identify ourselves, we say where we're from the land. But I've definitely noticed a huge kind of change more recently. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of space and a lot of room for growth. But while sometimes I do feel lonely and kind of like, guys, we're having this conversation about this thing, and I've already reached the answer to this like big pressing question that's floating around, and it's like, how have you not? But sometimes I just have to reorient myself to like the states that I'm in, and I feel like that's becoming more and more Wabanaki people are kind of stepping into like the climate science side of things and working in land trusts and working in conservation, and more land is being returned to Wabanaki hands, and returned to that, like that relationship is coming back. So I think for me that's been like, it's a very odd thing because I'm part white, I'm part Wabanaki. I have this education and I work in conservation, so I'm like kind of straddling two worlds. And I'm honestly just trying to use that to like the biggest advantages I possibly can.
Yeah. I definitely echo the same sentiments. I will say, in all honesty, I have felt really supported by my community. I'm very grateful for that. There is a lot of noise out there, but it's just noise, because the love and support I've received from my community continues to outweigh that time and time again. And I'm constantly surrounding myself around like people who are equally as like passionate about just like what they love, whether it be land, whether it be data, whether it be and also learning. I think a lot of it is me accepting humiliation and not knowing. it's a human thing to not know, and it's a human thing to feel humiliation, but it's like what you do with that humiliation that really matters. Whether you're connecting with people and learning that way, that's how I approach it, or whether like you're reading a book. And so I felt supported in my education and all that, and I was raised by like parents who, I love my parents. They are like constantly checking in on me. Like today they knew I was coming out to have this talk with y'all, and they were just like, you're gonna be fine. As I was telling them, like when I was in high school, I used to do debate, and I placed second in public forum, and I'm like, now I just do not like public speaking at all. But that's because there's so much fear in it too. Like when people like myself, Black and Muslim and a woman, are up on a stage and folks of privilege are listening to me, right? And I utilize humor. I remember Olivia and I were doing a workshop back in January, and one of the quotes from the workshop, it was policy, was, there is no revolution without humor, and I strongly agree with that, because if you cannot just like laugh one time a day, or if you're with me and I don't make you laugh, then something I did wrong, because I will laugh at anything I do, so it's great to share that laughter, and laughter is honestly one of the best medicines.
Yeah, I'll say that I'm not afraid of public speaking. We were talking about this earlier, that we were kind of the exact opposite, that when I was young I hated it. I was like, I can't do it. I would be shaking, my face would turn bright red and start crying. And now that I've gotten older, like I've had a lot of opportunities to do a lot of like different public speaking like options. And I've found that I really enjoy it. Well, one reason is because you're all sitting here listening to me talk, and I love that. I joke at work and say that I might as well have a degree in Yaponomics, because I'm really good at just talking, but I also like meeting new people and learning more about like their own experiences, and that was kind of what excited me most about this this opportunity, was to like hear these stories that other people have, like to talk about like your love for biology and making potions of sticks and dirt. Like I love that; it's amazing. And I also like one of the things I look forward to the most in being able to do this, and also learning to do this better for the future, because this is like one of the first types of talks that I've had the opportunity to do. In the past, I did a guest lecture series on the research that I did in undergrad on the extinct sea mink and the influence of climate change on shell middens on the coast of Maine, because I had a deep focus in archaeology that previously was my trajectory. Like I've excavated in Peru and New Mexico, and I did know about the Nature Conservancy because my archaeology field school was actually on Nature Conservancy land in Cliff, New Mexico, on the Gila River farm site, and then also in Cobscook Bay in Maine. And I've excavated in, I think 2 summers ago, I was in North Carolina, in Duke Forest. But I like that I've changed my trajectory a bit. Although I love data, and I love Excel, and I love spreadsheets, and as I've told everybody at work, I love LinkedIn. That's another one. That's like a running gag. While I love data, like the numbers don't really have personalities. So I have been enjoying the opportunity to kind of mix my passions of talking to people and like getting to know new people and to make people laugh, and to kind of like, I do think that laughter is one of the best ways to kind of move through like difficult things, but I also think that with joy there's always hope, and I feel like that's kind of what everybody needs a little bit of every day. Yeah, that's all I had to add to what you said.
We'll have one more question.
Well, it's not really a question. In response to your question that was just asked you, it's so important for that privileged audience that you're speaking to, for us to hear you, because the depth that you come from with the Native American view of the land and the connection and your history and your generational, many of us don't have that, and we don't claim it. And the more I hear of it, the depth that you bring to us and teach us about how we should be more connected to the land and to the people that surround us, you enrich our lives in a way that is really, really important. And you teach us what we don't know. And so I really thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's kind of the perfect.